Hey guys, Aaron here, back with another video. And today, this is a bit of an impromptu video in a way, almost like a PSA or sort of a guide video on what to do in the case of you have a dead video card in a way. So if you're like me, you try to find the cheapest video cards possible to add to your collection. You don't really always want to spend, top dollar for something that, previously you've seen at a really low price. Retro parts are becoming a bit of a premium these days, and what used to be $20, $30, $40 two and a half years ago, you're now paying $200 for, which really sucks. So what can you do if you're trying to find like an early Radeon card, like a 9700 Pro or something around that era of sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and you get it and it's dead on arrival, it's artifacting, or let's say you use it and then all of a sudden after the first hour or how much ever time goes by, it starts artifacting and having issues. A common thing for some people to do, and it's a bit of a should I, shouldn't I, does it work, do you do more harm than good, and that is baking your video card in the oven or in like a toaster oven or something like that gets you to put your video card into a heated space like an oven, get it up to a certain temperature to reflow the solder on the underside of the memory modules or underside of the chip to get it to resolder and fix any cracks that might have happened because of age or flexing in the mail or something like that. This is something that I have been very, very skeptical of for a very long time. There's been a lot of high-profile YouTubers that have done it, some to good success, some to not so good success. And then when you trickle down into the more community-based, like collection channels and things like that, there's definitely a camp A and a camp B where some think you do more harm than good, and then there's some think that no, there's no harm in it. If you prepare the video card, do it at the right temperature for the right amount of time, actually it works. Well, I've been more on camp this side where you do more harm than good, because I'm someone that wants to have video cards with intact decals and stickers, so I don't want to risk melting plastics, melting stickers, decals, things like that in a high heat environment, and I like to have no plastics on it, damaged, things like that. The white Molex connectors on cards can melt very easily, especially around the same temperatures that they're claiming you should be using in the oven to do baking your card. So I decided I wanted to do it for a little while, but I haven't really had a couple of cards to do it with issues that I know have been fixed by baking in the past. And over the last sort of 12 months or so, I've unfortunately had 2 cards in my collection fail. And these are 2 cards that are very common. The type of failure they've had is very common, and one of the fixes is to put it in an oven and bake it. And that's these 2 cards here. So it's my 256 meg ATI 9800 Pro by Sapphire, and then my Hercules 3D Prophet 9700 Pro. So for this 9000 series Radeon cards, it was actually very common that over time with flexing and aftermarket coolers being mounted on them and things like that, because of the offset nature of the mounting holes, you would end up putting a bit of twisting motion and stuff on the PCB if you used like screw-in style coolers and things like that. These little push pin ones aren't too bad, but it was common anyway for these cards, for this generation of cards, to actually crack the ball solder underneath the die itself, or even on memory modules as well if you flex the card a certain amount. And that's basically what happened to these cards. So unfortunately, one of the issues that plagues the 9700 Pro is it has that silver shim on it that lifts up higher than the die, so that gold standard reference cooler gets lifted up off the die. A common modification people do is to basically cut that shim off, almost similar to how people do delidding of CPUs these days. They basically put a razor under the edge of that little shim and lift it off, so then you're left with just the die. Then the cooler can mount properly to the die. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to risk damaging this because it took me 4 other attempts to get a working 9700 Pro. Once I got one, I didn't want to risk damaging it. I just fixed it by using an aftermarket cooler, which was one of these coolers on it. The downside is that because this cooler uses these, well, I don't know if you can see, it uses this mounting system with screws on it. Unfortunately, you can over tighten it, which means that it ends up putting a bit of bowing, like a bit of torque on the PCB. Because of that, I think I killed the card. It basically started artifacting with a lot of red artifacts and things like that all over the screen. Like I was using it perfectly fine for maybe 8-9 months, and then I wasn't really wanting to use it too much because I didn't want to risk damaging it. I built a new system. I wanted to get some benchmarking figures on that system, put the cooler on it, and I broke it. It can happen, it sucks, and it's a common thing that happens with these cards. I then didn't learn from my lesson, and because this card here has this reference sort of, really cheap, really crappy aluminium heatsink basically, I put this cooler on it as well. And I think I did the exact same thing to this card. I over torqued it. I think I cracked some of the ball solder underneath the die. It started throwing up red artifacts, and it would go all the way through installing drivers in Windows, in Windows XP, things like that. But the moment you try to run a game, you've just got red artifacts all over the screen, and it's horrible. The artifacts are there right through from the moment you boot the system up, through the BIOS, everything on both of these cards. And so with that particular error, it's commonly known that that's a common error for when you've cracked the ball solder on underneath the die itself, underneath the chip. So I've had these cards broken now for a while, and I've been really debating about whether I wanted to risk baking them. Especially with the 256 meg 9800 Pro with like the double amount of memory chips and stuff that are on the front and the back of it. This is probably a more rarer version of this card. I do believe they made 256 meg models that have the normal layout of like 2 on the front and 2 on the back, as in 4 on the L shape. So I didn't want to damage the card by sticking it in the oven. Didn't know a huge amount about it and didn't want to risk it. My reason for not wanting to bake this one is that it has these, I don't want to say copper plated because I don't think they're actually copper. They're a bit, maybe they are, but I think they're just aluminium copper plated or coloured heat sinks, and these are just held on by like thermal tape almost. So the moment these things heat up, they're going to fall off. There's a lot of paper. The labels and stuff on the back of this are in really good condition. There's this little heat sink that's on there as well, and the type of capacitors and components that are on here don't usually fare too well with temperature. So the card was dead. I didn't know whether to just keep it as a bookshelf piece in my collection, or whether to attempt baking with it. So it's been sitting there for months and months and months, and today I decided, let's give it a go, just for the fun of it. And so I did. I had so little faith in it actually working. I actually had more faith in it completely damaging the cards, melting the capacitors, blowing the capacitors up, melting the plastic parts that are on there, like the plastic that's in the thing in the display ports here, maybe melting the Molex connector thing there, things like that. I thought, oh god, it's there's no point in me doing a video. One, it's not going to work, knowing my luck. Two, it's probably going to damage the cards, and it's going to make for a horrible video. It's pretty much going to make for a video of it, like, do not do this. I didn't really have time to waste my time on that type of video, so I didn't even plan to film it. Oh, ye with little faith. So I wanted to try one other card just for the fun of it. I knew it was dead. This is 9800 GTX, GeForce 9800 GTX, and this one artifacts as well. Completely snowy artifacts all over the whole screen. Doesn't display any recognizable image at all. Doesn't post the system. And I just thought, for the fun of it, let's pull it apart, bake it, see what happens on this card. as well as these other A2R cards. So I had such little faith in this, I didn't even have my camera set up or anything like that to film the results or do proper video work of me pulling the cards apart, putting them in the oven, anything like that. I did a few photos just to chuck on Discord, but that was really it. Then when I baked them and tested them, I decided to get the camera out. Well, I decided to get my phone out at least to do the filming of the results, because I thought, hey, if it works, oh my god, I've got some kind of footage of it. If it doesn't work, delete it off my phone. I haven't wasted my time setting up my camera, my main camera, anything like that at all. So I stripped the cards down. I put them in the oven on a tray with just aluminium, like balls of aluminium underneath them, just to raise them up off the tray. Preheated the oven to 190 degrees Celsius. I think it was about 195 Celsius, which I believe is like, what, 375 Fahrenheit, I think. Made sure the oven was up to temperature without fan force on. So I had it in bake mode, not fan force mode. If you've got a choice, I recommend putting it in bake mode, not fan force. You lower the risk of melting things if you have it not on fan force, basically. Put them in there. Once the oven got up to temperature, put the cards in there for, I think it was around 10 to 12 minutes. 10 minutes the timer went off. I started to take them out after 10 minutes, but it was maybe 12 minutes by the time I got the last one out, something like that. And yeah, so what I'm going to do now is cut over to my phone footage, and you guys get to see my genuine reaction of what happened with the cards after I baked them for 10 minutes at 190 degrees Celsius in our kitchen oven, and two cards that I'd basically written off from my collection are here with me today still. So let's check out what it is, and I'll come back to you at the end of the video. Alright, well, I've just baked these two cards here. So it's the 256 meg 9800 Pro, and this is a 9800 GTX. That was one of the ones I got in the set of 4 that weren't working. And then I also baked my 9700 Pro, which I'm just about to plug in and see. I have not turned these on yet, so let's just see how we go. Oh. Hey. No. Don't tell me that actually fucking worked. Sit down. No way that worked. Okay, so I'm used to seeing red, like red artifacts all over the screen with this card. Oh my god. Have I actually managed to fix this? Oh god, I'm glad I've got that background at the moment, not the other one I was using. Wow, it detected it straight away. Okay. Install. Yeah, 9700 Pro. Continue. I mean, maybe it's like something in the 2D that's working. No, this card was like broken as shit. Like literally the moment you posted it into BIOS, the moment it posted, you had red lines and dots all over the whole screen. Oh god, look at the fingerprints. Alright, there's the first one. Let's get the secondary adapter installed. Yes. Thankfully, I've been running the X850 XT in here, so these drivers are relevant, thank God. And I'm really liking the Amiga driver. It's been a while since I've used the Amiga drivers. Okay, there we go. Hardware's now ready to use. Okay, let's restart. And let's cross our fingers. So I did 190 Celsius for about 10 to 12 minutes. So it's, what was that, 370 something? Was it 370 or was it 390 something Fahrenheit? I think it's 375 or something Fahrenheit from memory. Okay, no red lines, and we're going to boot in with drivers running. Oh my god, I can't believe I fixed this. I should have tried this with some of the older 9700s that I got. Like, getting this card to work and then getting this card to work will be amazing. But the fact that I can get one to work, probably this one more so, this is the one that I wanted to work the most. So now let's really see. New device found. Overclocking at startup will not be applied. Good, because I don't really want it to try and load the X850 clocks out of the gate. Shit, let's just... I don't want to stress it too much. Well, look, let's just... I'll jump straight into 3D Mark. Oh man, if this works. Okay, let's just... nope. Game tests. Let's just go straight to just Mother Nature, just because. Okay, here we go. I didn't even bother wanting to film a video of this because I was convinced it was just not going to work. I was just bored this afternoon and thought, why the hell not? Never done baking GPUs before, ever. Oh my god. Now the real question is, I know sometimes when you bake cards, they last for, you know, a little bit and then they break again. And it's very notorious, I know, that the 9000 series cards are really bad for having the solder crack on the bottom of the chips. Or like the solder balls crack underneath the... Ooh. Okay, that's a bit of stutter. Interesting. I want to just let the test loop through to just see if it actually, you know, warms up and then actually stays like it. There's no point in it, you know, getting too excited if it works straight out of the gate for a few minutes but then fails. So I mean, I'm going to do a bit more testing with these off video, just to sort of, I want to do at least an hour or two of some stress tests with some good cooling forced on the fan, because over the card, because I want to make sure they do actually stay cool. I mean, this is running the silencer on it anyway, and this case has got a shitload of airflow in it. So, yeah. Alright, I'm going to stop the video, and I'm going to test the 256 meg 9800 Pro, but hey, we're looking good for this card at least, for the moment. Alright, so I've just plugged the 256 meg 9800 Pro in, and well, let's see. This was giving the red lines exactly the same as what the 9700 was. Oh, well, we've got something. No. This one as well? I can't have lucked out that. Oh my god. I'm gobsmacked. I've never baked a card before. I've been very skeptical of it actually ever working because, and I've never ever wanted to do it to my own cards because even if they're not working, I don't want to damage things like decals and stick. Right. So it's working. I guess I'll just run the same thing, right? So this card was totally balked, like the same as the other one, both of them. This one pretty much didn't survive very long after I got it and it died. It pretty much was artifacting within a week or two of me using this card when it arrived here. I even changed the thermal paste and everything like that, but clearly it had a bit of a tough life. So the 9700 was a bit more depressing because I'd gone through like 4 or 5 different 9700s trying to find one and buy one that would work, and in the end I managed to get this one that I got, the 3D Profit one, and oh my god, this card's working as well. Holy shit. Yeah, I got lucky with the 5th 9700 Pro, and had it fully working and everything, looked after it. I barely used it. I did not want to risk just like breaking it. I didn't even want to do the shim mod and remove the shim on it. But then one day I wanted to test it for a video so I had some results on a particular platform, and it just didn't like it, and it started, you know, doing the red lines and crashing, and it was horrible to start with. This card did that pretty much out of the gate. It worked for a few times and then it didn't. But holy shit, I've managed to fix it. Oh man. I thought I was genuinely having to buy, like, try and find these cards all over again. I can't believe it. I've managed to play Far Cry now for about an hour or so with the 9700 Pro in there, and unbelievably, yeah, this card is back to working condition. I don't know what the long-term working condition is going to be like, but hopefully, at least for now, yeah, it's going to stay running quite well. And Jensen's out there enjoying some food by the sounds of it. Anyway, catch you guys later. So, success. For the two cards that I really wanted to work, they work again. And I'm kind of a bit blown away. I was not expecting this to work at all. Should you do this, I'm going to probably say, if you've got a card that you haven't invested a huge amount of money in, that you don't want to run the risk of damaging visually, like melting, yellowing, you know, Molex connectors, burning off labels, singeing labels, wrecking your oven, because if you had like leaky capacitors and things like that, and a really bad card go through the oven, you can obviously run the risk of putting a bad smell through your oven, things like that. It's up to you. But I did quite a bit of research into this. I wanted to validate and make sure that the majority of people that had success doing this, what temperatures did they use, what was their, what kind of length of time did they put it in for, what preparation of the cards did they do. You know, some people were talking about putting some like thermal stuff around some plastics to sort of protect it from the raw, you know, heat of the oven. Then there was people like, nah, just chuck it in there, you know. Someone did like the coolers and all, and that was a bad mistake because he forgot to take the coolers off and the fans melted. So yeah, common sense. So if you have an old card, especially these old ATI cards that have that issue where suddenly you get that, I think some artifacts are green, some artifacts are red, some artifacts are blue. It's something to do with the output of the signal to maybe like the display ports or something like that on the card that means that it has artifacts and stuff on it. And RAM chips could have some issues as well. Is it worth baking this particular series of cards if you have that issue? I'm going to say yes. For the ATI card, for the 9700 Pro, I've thankfully I haven't done a really good job of white balancing this video, and I'm not really doing much after the fact, but these labels are white still. They didn't really yellow at all. I think this one with all the serial number information on it is a little bit yellower, but this main big one, which has, you know, the 3D Profit 9700 Pro, this is still just as white as when I got the card, basically. In terms of all of these things, they got a bit soft, so you could sort of move the heat sinks around a little bit, but they'd never detached. I was worried about them, you know, sitting in the oven and then they were just like going to fall off. The other thing I genuinely didn't know, because no one mentioned this, is if you're reflowing the solder and you have a card sitting like that in the oven, well, won't the components just fall off the back of the card? Well, no, actually, because they weigh so little, and basically the tension almost of the solder of those parts to the PCB, even though the solder does solidify a little bit, there's enough friction and I don't know the exact word for it, but there's enough they're not going to fall off, basically. You don't, unless you bump it the moment you get out of the oven and you smear something across all the components while they're still completely, the solder solidified, that's obviously going to cause a lot of damage. But if you're very careful, pick the card up from the edges and not touching anything on the card, You know, I didn't even touch the cards out of the oven. I had them sitting and I just pulled the tray in and out, waited till they cooled down for about half an hour before I even bothered to touch them or anything. Just to make sure that all the solder rehardened before I bumped anything. It's pretty safe to do for this particular card. It didn't really do any damage to the heat sinks at all. None of them sort of lost their colouring. These heat sinks on the back of here were sort of fading in colour anyway when I bought it. So some of them, you know, the colours and stuff are on like the copper colour on that is a bit inconsistent anyway. Didn't change it from going in the oven. There's still the pen marking on all the capacitors on the back, still blue across all of them. That didn't fade, burn off or anything like that at all. There was no smoke from this card or anything like that. It was perfectly fine. This card, however, this sapphire card, unfortunately, this is where you have to be careful. So of course I took the coolers off all of these cards. I didn't put them in the oven with the coolers or anything like that on. I also took off the little plastic thing where the fan header is. So obviously I took the fan off, took the lead and everything off, but you're left with that little like plastic socket. I did pull that off as well because I did see a lot of people accidentally leaving that on, and it would actually melt and warp because of how small and thin the plastic is. One thing that I looked at was that to see whether I should be taking this plastic Molex connector off, because essentially you just you can pop it forward up, and then you can kind of slide it off the metal prongs for the Molex. I tried it briefly, realized that it was going to put a lot too much force on the PCB, didn't want to do it, didn't want to risk it, so I didn't. I left it on there. And this has that nice shiny silver sapphire sticker on it. That unfortunately did not survive the oven. So this little sticker normally is like a holographic sapphire sticker. It completely melted. You could actually see it sizzling in the oven. And the actual Molex connector itself has yellowed quite a bit. So this would be quite a nice white, like a good condition Molex socket or connector. Now it's definitely, you know, it looks like it's been very yellowed, took a lot of heat, and the sticker on top of it, while I'm going to leave it there, it's shrunk a little bit, and it no longer has that holographic look to it. It's almost like a layer underneath it has burnt away or melted away, which is very unfortunate. But the rest of the cards survived perfectly fine. The label on the back, even there was like a little bit of paper sticking up, not a single bit of singeing on the back of it. Didn't yellow, didn't burn, didn't catch on fire. No damage to anything else, no melting or no anything to do with the connectors on the back here. They're all survived, they're all fine, and yeah. And I think that's because I managed to get the temperature spot on. It was hot enough that it reflowed the solder just enough to make a contact with whatever ball joints and stuff were actually broken, but it wasn't hot enough and wasn't in the oven long enough to melt or cause any other damage. Obviously when the card came out, it was ridiculously hot. I had put my hand over the card, and the amount of heat that was radiating, you would normally have a heart attack if your video card was getting that hot. But it survived, it works, that's great. So what's my sort of conclusion and takeaway from this? If you're a retro collector and you've gone out and if you've had to spend a couple of $100s on that video card, that flagship video card that you've been looking for ages, and you finally get it, you've been looking for it for ages, and it's dead. It's artifacting, it's having some issues. If it is displaying some kind of output where you can see the BIOS, you can see Windows, there's just colored artifacts on screen, maybe it's working completely fine in boot up, working completely fine in Windows, you go through the whole driver installation, but the moment you run a 3D game, you start getting like graphical artifacts and stuff through the map, like geometry issues and things like that. That can be a RAM related issue. If you're getting like multicolored artifacts and things like that from the moment you boot the system up, that may be a more like it's typically like it could be a voltage issue where some kind of trace or solder has cracked and there's not enough voltage getting to a certain part of a chip or a certain component on the board. Something like that can be fixed by reflowing the solder. Some people are very purist. Some people are very purist and say that you need to get a proper reflow, rework station for this type of work, and they are kind of correct. To do this properly, professionally, with someone who's experienced with that sort of a tool, knows how to use it properly to do this type of repair, that's the proper way to do it. But that can be an expensive avenue if you want to get into it, and it can also be an expensive job to get fixed. If you paid $20-30 for one of these cards because you got absolutely a really good bargain, but it's not working, you might not want to spend a couple of $100 to get it reflowed to get it fixed. So sticking it in an oven for free to just see if it fixes it is actually a win-win. So prepare the oven, make sure it's up to temperature, clean the cards, get rid of all the thermal compound, get rid of all the dust and the dirt, because you don't really want to bake any of that into the cards at all. If you're taking oily thermal pads off of RAM chips, things like that, use some isopropyl alcohol to clean off all that oil as well, because what you don't want to have happen is that oil to get in between the solder of the RAM chip or the die and the PCB, because then the solder's not going to reflow. So be careful of that as well. 10 minutes, 190 degrees, thereabouts. Don't go much more than that. I recommend not using a fan force oven, or if you have got a fan force oven, try to orientate the cards in a way that doesn't have the air blowing directly across them. It just means that you can heat up the top of the capacitors and things like that a lot more than the actual PCB. So same sort of thing happens when you bake potato chips and things like that in the oven. You notice those top edges get really, really burnt quickly before the bottom ones cook. Think of it the same sort of way. You don't want to singe the top of your capacitors, because then you really risk damaging them before you've actually reflowed the solder. So that's why an even bake through the oven is probably what I'd recommend. But it works. Your mileage may vary, be careful, but it's definitely worth it if you want to get that card working again and you want to try something before you have to buy another card. So there you go. I'm now a believer. I've got a couple of other cards that I'm going to do this to now that are probably not really worth doing videos about. I just more want to experiment with them and see if I can get them fixed. Both of these two cards that are now working had die issues, not RAM chip issues. I have a card that does have a broken RAM chip. I can actually flex the card and see the actual the balls on the bottom of the RAM chip actually break away from the PCB because of the crack that's there. I'm going to try to reflow that, see if it works. But it's a crappy card, so it's not worth doing a video about. So, success. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I know this has been a little bit of a long and unique video in a way, but hope you've enjoyed, and hooray, I don't have to rebuy these cards or find them all over again. Yeah.